And welcome back, Buck Bookers, to another episode of Buck's Books. I am your host, Buck, and today we will be talking about yet another spooky book for October. So, I'm in a difficult situation here because I read a lot of these spooky books, and I've read a lot of them very recently, but not all of them are worthy of a review. And I still have a backlog of books that are like marginally spooky related to Between Two Fires that I still haven't done, but I will. I will. I'm good for it. I also actually finished that situation where you do like the tags for the YouTube, and then I just didn't upload it. I don't know why. I probably will, but not today. Today, we are going to be talking about the book Leech by Hiron Enns, maybe? Hiron Ennis? Hiron Enos? I don't know. But it's a sci-fi horror book, right? And it's told from the point of view of this really pretentious parasite that has taken on the role of a medical practitioner for basically all of mankind. And it feels threatened by the presence of another parasite, which is feral and feeding from the same populations. And it's interesting because it's from the point of view of a hive mind. The book takes place from the point of view of a hive mind. Now, granted, for the purposes of the narrative, they the hive mind character, the perspective that we follow, is cut off from the rest of the hive mind. So we see how they think of themselves, and we see how they believe themselves to be this entity that has all of these different bodies, and all of these bodies are theirs in the same way that like all of my fingers are mine. And they do different things, kind of. And it wouldn't want to lose any of the fingers, but like if one goes, it's not the end of the world. And that's sort of how the Institute, it calls itself the Institute because it has taken over medical practice for for all of humanity, and that's sort of how it ingratiates itself to humanity. Like, it's also cruising under the radar. It's not letting you know that it exists, but at the same time, the doctors can't be turned away because they're doctors. So it's got its gross little feelers in every aspect of society, and it is in direct competition, fresh direct competition, with this Lovecraftian abomination that is made of like gross little like black pseudopods and tentacles. Well, they're more like tendrils, I guess. That's a barely a distinction. That crawls in through orifices, sneak behind your eye or in through your ear, and then it like lodges itself somewhere in your anatomy and directly drains from your bodily tissues. Whereas the institute is like a collection of cells that accumulate in your blood. So it exists in your bloodstream, but they're both parasites. They're both, and that's sort of where the title comes from, but only one of the places the title comes from. The title has it works on a lot of levels. I'll get there. So, firstly, the book itself was a fantastic read and a triumph of body horror. Probably the best body horror book I've read since Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo, which I guess we can call it horror. It was certainly horrifying, but it was more like really sad. No, we'll go with horror. It was horror. It's just not like spooky Halloween horror. It's like existential dread horror. But if you haven't read it and you're into existential dread, I'd check it out. There are no characters in Leech. Back to Leech. There are no characters in Leech that you can actually connect with because everyone is so horrible. But there are elements of the various characters that you can identify with over the course of the book. So enough to like sort of care about them, or at least enough to like establish an emotional handhold in the story. So like even if you don't care about the characters, even if you can't relate to anyone directly, there are human elements to enough of them that you can sort of at least engage with the story. At least be like, okay, I can. It's not like a horror movie where I'm looking forward to them all dying. I kind of care what happens from here. So on the surface, the book is about parasites at war, but it is not a coincidence that they're both the kind of parasites that burrow into the body and disappear beneath the surface. The story itself is actually about childhood sexual trauma. The abuse is examined at a macro level when exploring the Institute itself, which dresses itself in all of these beautiful sugared lies about the greater good and the protection of its poor, oblivious flock, maintenance of its constituency, while it eats away at their bodies and keeps them small and crippled by draining their individual resources, and then it opts to sacrifice them from its collection like chess pieces, like fingers, rationalizing away the loss. Well, obviously, I wish I didn't have to lose these perfectly good bodies, but that's just the way things are sometimes. And the Institute is selective because the way that it sort of repopulates stocks its larder, for all intents and purposes, is to take in. You ever go to one of those animal rescues, one of those like bird sanctuaries, and you'll have like the ambassador species there, and they're like birds with busted wings, or they're blind in one eye or something like that. They wouldn't make it in the wild. They wouldn't survive out there. So now they are kept in captivity, and the reason it's not cruel to keep them in captivity is because if they were not in this captivity, they would be dead. That's kind of what the Institute looks for. They want children of incredibly poor families, or they want children with some sort of physical or mental disability, and then the Institute, it collects these kids, and because it can get into, it's in their bloodstream, and it serves the purpose of doing all medicine in this world. It can not only do medicine on like the outside, like the actual what doctors do as medicine, but it is able to interact with tissues directly because it exists in the bloodstream. So it can repair some of these problems from the inside out as well as from the outside in. So it deliberately targets the weak and the forgotten and the deformed and the abandoned. And it takes in the sick and the orphaned in the same way serial killers mostly target prostitutes, because they assume that no one will come looking for them. It takes these burdens away from the families, or it takes these orphans, or it takes people who it thinks no one's going to miss. And that's what it recruits. The Institute takes them in. And there is the process of infection. And it never gives like a hard and fast percentage, but based on just how the Institute talks about the process of infection, probably only like a quarter of the infected actually survive the process and become hosts. The rest are killed horribly and drugged and then killed horribly and painfully in the process of the infection. So the titular Leech, the Institute has a few hundred bodies all over the world. And that means it has probably killed closer to thousands. Because, even the bodies that it maintains at a given time, they get old faster than most because the Institute is draining off their life force. It's killing them. And that's why it mentions a couple times that all the bodies are small and weak. They don't eat much. And that's never really explained, but another facet of just sort of that parasitism, right? So that's the macro level. But at the micro level, there is a component of literal sexual abuse that the Baron's son inflicts on his mute houseboy, right? The kid is the last survivor of this nearly extinct Morlock subspecies and literally incapable of speech. He's mute. And again, this is hitting the same points. Someone incapable of fending for themselves. Someone incapable of rejecting these advances, which were never requests anyway. No one is coming to save this kid because there's no one left to save this kid. Small, orphaned, without a voice, right? And so that makes the climactic, vaguely Shakespearean finale that much more satisfying. It's like got shades of Billy Bob Thornton's The Gift. I'm not going to ruin it on you. You should read that. You should read this book if any of this tickled your fancy. But I will say it was an immensely powerful piece, and it was a thorough exploration of a topic that's normally too taboo to be discussed, right? And much like the parasites lurking in the host's blood or nestled behind the retina in the case of the Lovecraftian parasite that is also the Leech, the perpetrators, they get away with it by going unnoticed, because we're not looking hard enough. Leech is a cautionary tale and a sort of call to arms. You look closer, and if you see the mass, no matter how much good the mass has done for you, no matter how many of your defects it has convinced you that it is cured, you gotta start cutting, and you can't stop until all of its tendrils are out of you. And one of the strongest sort of juxtapositions in the book is how superior the Institute thought of itself as compared to the Lovecraft one, right? So the Institute are just like white cells that show up in the bloodstream, and that's it. It thinks of itself as sort of like a fungus or a protist. It doesn't know what it is. It doesn't know where it came from. It just knows that in order to continue perpetuation, it needs to justify its existence by doing good, by helping its by helping people, But it's not just about helping people. It's also about maintaining cover, And it looks down on this other one because the other one doesn't do anything for them. Toward the end of the book, it's suggested to the Institute that this Lovecraftian thing is its phage. Like, the Institute is the bacteria, and the tendril monster is its phage because it's targeting its hosts, and it seems to be capable of killing the Institute itself. The Institute can't die unless all of its hosts are killed. The Institute will find a way to live on. It is a simultaneous hive mind. They're communicating all over the universe for all intents and purposes, wherever they are. Somehow. But if you kill all the bodies, then the Institute is no more. So the Institute is leeching away at the bodies that it is stealing, right? The reason I keep calling it the Lovecraft thing is because they gave it a scientific name, but I listened to it by audiobook while I was driving around the desert, so I don't remember the fake scientific name they gave it. So just stick with me on this. The Lovecraftian one. It is also, it leaches more directly from the body. It feeds on the tissues, it feeds on the blood, it depletes certain of the tissues, like it was causing problems in the eye, and it causes physical pain to wherever it is implanted, And the Institute is more subtle than that, which is another reason the Institute looks down on the Lovecraft one. And then the doctors themselves, when I talk about the Institute, I'm talking about the bacteria or whatever it is, but the reason they are the Institute is because that is their collective. They all study together. They all study at this colossal library that the Institute has compiled, and that's where they learn medicine. So they are the Institute, but the doctors are also disparagingly called leeches because of things like bloodletting, syringes, These are the only ones who really do that in this fantasy situation. So there's another leech. But also the abusers. You know, whether it is the case of the parasite, the literal parasites themselves, or the figurative parasite of the Baron's son, or even the Baron himself, they're all draining the resources. They're just leeching. They're giving nothing except the illusion of giving something. And I mean, most leeches don't actually present that, but it's the poetic license. And the reason that their victims allow it to happen is because they buy the lie. And that's what the book is really about. Don't buy the lie. It's really thought-provoking, but it'll also make your skin crawl. And when I say body horror, Cronenberg, like Hellraiser, like I don't even have something to compare it to. It's in a league of its own. So, very psychological horror, very body horror, very deep. It's about trauma. So if you like to read horror stories that are actually analogies for trauma, you could do a lot worse than Leech. I think on Goodreads, I gave it 4 stars out of 5, and 5 stars are just like, I reserve that for the best books I've ever read in my life. I don't hand out 5 stars lightly, so Leech is really good. The only real reason that I denied it that 5th star is because you don't care that much about any of the characters. And they tried to make you care about the characters. They tried to make you care about the one host in particular, because the reason that this particular incident, aside from the discovery of the Lovecraftian thing, was relevant is because something happened. You know, there's something in the atmosphere, or some cutting off from radio waves. I don't know. That was also not very clearly explained, but the Institute was cut off from the rest of its hive mind. So it was just like one pseudopod of the Institute in this single body. And then the body started to rebel. And the body fought back against the Institute. And the body reclaimed itself. And sort of turned the Institute on itself. So it's cathartic. Worth the read. If any of this sounds good, definitely check it out and let me know what you think. Also, if you're here and you haven't subscribed yet, just subscribe. Dude, what are you doing? Like, I'm going to keep doing this. If you keep reading these, come on. All right. It's enough out of me. I'll see you probably later in the week. Take care.